Eddard Stark remembered the fields of the Trident, long grass trampled by war horses, the roar of battle in his ears, and the dull ache of losing friends. He had returned from Robert's rebellion with a sense of weariness and a wish for peace, only to find intrigue and new challenges sprouting like weeds. There was always something stirring in the Seven Kingdoms, some fresh discord ready to claim men's lives and children's futures. Though he believed his hardest days lay behind him, the moment he set foot in King's Landing, he knew that was a lie. The air in the capital felt heavy, thick with old grudges and too many secrets. He had come as Hand of the King, a position he accepted only out of loyalty to his friend Robert Baratheon. But within days of arriving, he saw the fissures that threatened the realm. Whispers abounded in the Red Keep. The royal coffers seemed drained beyond measure, and the Lannisters appeared to be the only ones with gold enough to keep the crown afloat. More than once, Ned thought of resignation, of returning north to Winterfell to see his son Robb assume more responsibilities and to watch young Bran climb the walls as he loved to do. But something in his heart, call it honor or duty, compelled him to stay. Robert had risked his life during the rebellion for the good of the realm, or so Ned believed, and now that realm was overshadowed by the presence of Lord Tywin Lannister. Tywin had not shown his face in court much since the final days of the rebellion and Robert's ascension. His direct involvement in politics had lessened, but his influence was felt everywhere, like an invisible hand pulling strings. It was Tywin's gold that financed King's Landing. It was Tywin's command that shaped the West. And it was Tywin's daughter, Cersei, who sat beside King Robert on the Iron Throne, sharing a bed with a man who was steadily drowning in wine and apathy. Ned could see it plainly. The Lannisters' hold over the crown would only tighten with time. If Robert remained disinterested in rule, everything would unravel sooner rather than later. When Eddard learned from various sources in the Red Keep that Tywin had been privately summoning bannermen and allies to the capital to solidify new trade and marriage alliances, alarm bells rang in his mind. He had not come to King's Landing to pick fights or hold personal grudges. He understood that the realm was tenuously bound together, yet he had also sworn to protect it. The notion of confronting Lord Tywin as early as possible began as a quiet thought and grew into a resolute plan. If Tywin was consolidating power outside the formal structures of court, then Ned believed someone needed to call him to account, someone who was not swayed by gold or false courtesy. And so, not a fortnight after he first arrived at the Red Keep as the new Hand, Ned decided to meet Tywin Lannister face to face. He wanted no illusions, no half measures. Either Tywin would act openly for the good of the realm, or he would be reminded that there were still men willing to oppose him. Men who had no taste for Lannister wealth, only for justice. He arranged for a formal audience in the Tower of the Hand. On the appointed day, the corridors leading to Ned's solar were lined with a handful of Stark guards, men who had traveled with him from Winterfell and who would sooner die than betray him. He did not intend to threaten Tywin physically, an unthinkable notion, but Ned did want a certain presence, a reminder of the North's stern resolve. He sat in a high-backed chair, the windows open to let in the warm breeze from Blackwater Bay, though the air still felt stifled. Papers and ledgers were strewn across a table by the far wall, each detailing how quickly the crown's debts had grown. When Tywin Lannister arrived, it was with a small retinue of men in crimson cloaks. All wore the lion's sigil somewhere on their attire. Tywin himself was dressed in simple black, with a gold clasp shaped like a roaring lion pinned over his heart. He walked with calculated grace, face rigid, eyes as cold as they were cunning. He was younger than many in the city remembered from the days he served as Hand to Aerys Targaryen, and yet his presence loomed large. The young Lannister men behind him seemed subdued, almost like ornaments. The Tower of the Hand was Ned's domain, after all. Tywin paused at the threshold, gaze sweeping over the Stark guards, noting their presence. Then he inclined his head in the barest gesture of courtesy. "Lord Stark," he said in that deep, measured voice, "you have summoned me. Let us hope your reason is a worthy one." Ned rose, placing a hand on the pommel of his sword, ice, which remained sheathed at his hip. It was merely a gesture of formality and personal comfort, one signifying that he did not fear who entered his solar. "My lord," Ned replied, equally formal. "Thank you for coming. Please sit." Tywin nodded once, stepping forward and dismissing his retinue with a flick of his hand. They retreated to stand near the door, vigilant, but not too near. Tywin chose a plain chair, never taking his eyes off Ned. "I understand these are turbulent times," he said. "Where money and power intermingle, the lines can become blurred, especially in a realm such as ours. If you intend to request more gold from my house, be direct about it." Ned stared at the older man, conscious of the intense quiet in the room. Outside, the chatter of city life rose and fell like a distant dream. Within these walls, they might as well have been in a fortress of solitude. "I will not dissemble with you, Lord Tywin," Ned began. "I'm no master of coin, nor do I seek to bleed the Lannisters for every stag in their coffers. I summoned you here because I'm concerned about matters of state. Your house is intimately tied to the crown, through marriage, through gold, through influence. Yet the manner in which your house operates, at times outside the king's knowledge, concerns me deeply. I fear it does the realm more harm than good." Tywin's pale green eyes narrowed fractionally, just enough for Ned to notice. "You talk of my house as if it were an enemy. House Lannister has long supported the Iron Throne. My daughter is your queen, and her children wear the Baratheon stag, or so the realm believes." Ned felt the weight of that unspoken suspicion that had already begun to gnaw at him. The color of the royal children's hair, the lack of Baratheon features. But that was not what this meeting was about. "Not yet. I am not questioning your loyalty in the broad sense," Ned said carefully, "but rather your methods. Already, merchants from the free cities say they are beholden to Lannister trade contacts to carry goods through. Some petty lords grumble they must negotiate with your envoys before the crown grants them new charters. I see a creeping accumulation of power, my lord. I see the king left out of decisions or overruled by your gold." Tywin clasped his hands on his knee, posture as rigid as a statue. "King Robert is free to govern as he sees fit, but if he lacks gold in the treasury, if he depends on loans from House Lannister, is that not his decision? Have I demanded too steep an interest? Have I threatened him with force?" He did not raise his voice, but there was a controlled edge to it. "If men choose to do business with Casterly Rock rather than the Iron Throne's master of coin, that is not my doing. The realm goes where the gold flows." At that moment, Ned realized that this confrontation would not be easily resolved by words alone. Tywin believed himself above reproach. "King Robert is not as apt in his rule as he was in his youth, nor is he as attentive. You know as well as I do that matters are neglected. Yet that does not give you the right to seize the mechanisms of power for your own ends." Tywin rose slightly in his seat, but not enough to suggest threat. Rather, it was a slight motion that commanded attention. "You speak of rights, Lord Stark, but in these kingdoms, there is one right that has always mattered above all others. The right of power. I do not claim the throne. I only ensure that if the realm needs gold or stability, House Lannister is in a position to provide it." Ned studied him. He could feel the tension in the room, even in the stillness of his guards. Would the realm have survived if there had been no gold from the west after Robert's rebellion? Maybe, maybe not. I do not deny that your house has done its share to maintain stability. What I question is the future direction this alliance takes. That is why I summoned you. To speak plainly, I do not want to see the realm go the way of the Mad King's final days, where one man controlled everything in the shadows. Tywin's expression did not shift, but Ned sensed a flicker of memory behind those eyes, the recollection of how Aerys Targaryen had dismissed Tywin as hand and insulted him at every turn. Tywin said nothing of that, though. Instead, he stood up. He was not overly tall, but his presence dwarfed the room. "Lord Stark, if you fear a Lannister tyranny, you waste your fear. We have no need to claim the throne openly. Our daughter is queen. Our blood sits upon the seat of power. Should the worst come to pass and King Robert's support waver, do you believe the realm would back your sense of honor before it backed my gold?" Tywin said it simply, as if stating a basic truth. Ned rose as well, crossing the space that separated them. Sometimes I wonder if that's exactly the choice that might come. Honor against gold. My father once believed in the decency of the ruling house. The Mad King repaid him with fire. The Lannisters did not burn him, but your history is not innocent. The sack of King's Landing. Tywin's gaze turned to stone. I took the city for Robert, your friend, he said coldly. That war was not won by gentleness. Do not lecture me on innocence, Ned Stark. War is ugly, and those who survive write the tales. For a moment, Ned clenched his jaw, forcibly recalling the memory of Princess Elia and her children, butchered by Gregor Clegane under Lannister colors. He recalled the path of blood that Tywin's men had cut through King's Landing to present the city to the soon-to-be King Robert. I do not dispute war's horror, but I do not condone the slaughter of innocents and the use of terror to hold power. Tywin inclined his head, a small, contemptuous gesture. Your illusions do you credit, Lord Stark, but illusions they remain. Now, I see no purpose in continuing this conversation. You summon me for a reckoning, you said. Yet all I hear are accusations that I have done no more than support the realm's faltering finances and keep my house secure. If you wish to hamper Lannister influence, perhaps you should speak to the king, remind him of his duties. See how far that goes. Ned took a breath, then released it, his own composure straining. You may go, Lord Tywin, he said, voice controlled. But know this, while I am hand of the king, I will not stand by and let one house shape the realm's future unilaterally. There are other great houses in the Seven Kingdoms. I intend to see them all have a voice. Tywin watched him, unreadable. I have no doubt you believe that, but do not mistake your office for absolute authority. The king can dismiss you with a single word. The realm can turn on you in the blink of an eye. Think carefully about the course you set, Ned Stark. One misstep, and you may find yourself alone in a field of enemies. With that, Tywin gestured for his retinue, and they departed. The door closed heavily behind them, leaving Ned in the hush of his solar, an uneasy feeling coiling in his stomach. He inhaled, placed a hand on the tabletop near the account ledgers, and wondered if he had done more harm than good in confronting Tywin so directly. But there was no turning back now. The lion had been called to account. Whether he would change or dig in his claws remained to be seen. In the following days, Ned went about his duties as hand with renewed vigilance. He introduced motions in the small council to curb some of the crown's reliance on Lannister gold. Peter Baelish, the master of coin, offered sly smiles and circuitous arguments about debts and interest rates, while Varys the Spider quietly observed, neither opposing nor lending support outright. Grand Maester Pycelle seemed mostly concerned with ensuring the king's wine supply never ran dry. Lord Renly, as ever, played the charming courtier, seldom demonstrating any deeper interest in financial matters. And King Robert himself, bored and restless, waved off the details, claiming that if a feast needed paying for, Tywin's gold was as good as any. Several times, Ned tried to speak in private with Robert, to glean if the king understood the precarious nature of the realm's finances. Each time, Robert shrugged or changed the subject, preferring to discuss hunts or the next tournament, or lament the monotony of life away from the battlefield. We never had these problems in the war, Ned, Robert groused over a table laden with half-eaten pies. Battles are straightforward, there's an enemy, you kill the enemy. But now we're drowning in feasts and festivals and petitions. God, how I hate it all. Ned would grit his teeth and try to press on. Your Grace, the coin that pays for these feasts is borrowed more often than not. Lord Tywin is too willing a creditor. If this continues, the throne will be so far in debt that a single word from Tywin could topple your rule. Robert roared with laughter and took another swig of ale. Tywin Lannister toppling my rule? By the gods, Ned, you've grown paranoid in your old age. He's my father-in-law, is he not? You think he wants to see his grandsons dethroned? Don't be daft. Ned only sighed. At least speak with him yourself, Robert. Set some terms on these loans. Ensure the realm's independence in principle, if nothing else. But Robert would wave him away. All right, soon. But not now. There's a new hunting ground I want to explore just outside the city. I hear the boars are thick as fleas on a rat. I need to skewer a few, to feel alive again. Ned wanted to insist, but the fatigue in Robert's eyes told him the king would not hear another word. And so it went, day after day, small council meeting after small council meeting, with Ned's attempts at reigning in Lannister influence met with polite dismissal or sly deflection. Tywin rarely appeared at court, but Ned heard from watchers in the streets that the Lannister retinue in the city was larger than normal, that Tywin's banners in the west had been gathering more levies than usual. Yet no open threat was made. It was more like a silent, inexorable tightening of an invisible net around the crown. Ned grew restless. He knew that if he allowed Tywin to operate unchecked, the realm would become even more beholden to him. So he resolved to act outside the usual channels of the small council, forging alliances of his own among the other major houses. He had no illusions. Many of the lords in King's Landing were already entrenched in Lannister business. But if Ned could reach out to men in the Vale, the Reach, and perhaps even Dorne, there might be a coalition strong enough to balance the West's power. His first overture was to Lord Hoster Tully of Riverrun, his wife Catelyn's father. Though the old man was in failing health, he was still head of House Tully, and the Riverlands remained strategically vital. Catelyn wrote to him in Ned's name, inquiring about mutual support for the crown that did not depend entirely on Lannister gold. Hoster's reply was cautious, but he hinted that his bannermen might be willing to shift certain trade routes away from Lannister-controlled roads if the crown could provide better terms. Ned took that as a promising sign. He next considered reaching out to Dorne. Prince Doran Martell was known for his patient cunning, and the Martells had old grievances against the Lannisters, dating back to the sack of King's Landing and the murder of Elia Martell. Yet they were also slow to move, preferring elaborate schemes to direct confrontation. Ned composed a carefully worded letter, expressing regret for the tragedies of the rebellion and a hope for better relations under the current crown. He couched it in enough official language that it seemed a gesture from the king's hand, rather than a personal plea. He knew it was risky, but if there was one region that would love to see Tywin Lannister's influence diminished, it was Dorne. Meanwhile, Ned made subtle inroads with some lesser lords in King's Landing, men from the Stormlands and the Reach who found themselves on the periphery of the king's retinue. He offered them small royal favors, direct from the hand, that bypassed the usual need for Lannister gold. He arranged to expedite certain trade permissions or investigate disputes that had been shelved for years. Little gestures, but they built goodwill. All the while, King Robert indulged in hunts, feasts, and the occasional council meeting where he seemed half asleep. Cersei Lannister watched Ned from her seat beside Robert, her green eyes never missing a shift in the political wind. She rarely spoke to Ned directly unless it was a trivial courtesy. Yet each time they locked gazes, Ned felt the malice simmering behind her polite mask. He knew she would report everything to Tywin eventually, and so he made no efforts to hide his intentions. Concealment was not Ned Stark's way, nor was it a tactic he thought would succeed in the viper pit that was King's Landing. Better to be open, to stand tall, and let the Lannisters know he would not cower. Then came the day Ned discovered, through one of Varys's little whispers, that Tywin had extended an offer of marriage alliance to Lord Mace Tyrell of Highgarden. One of Tywin's younger nephews, or so the rumor went, was to wed a cousin of the Tyrell line. It seemed a harmless enough union, but Ned suspected it had deeper meaning. The Tyrells commanded the Reach, one of the richest and most populous regions in the Seven Kingdoms. If Tywin could tie them closer to the Lannisters, it would undermine Ned's attempts to form a broader coalition of houses to balance Lannister power. Ned acted swiftly. In a private meeting with Lord Renly Baratheon, who was, after all, master of laws and close in age to Loras Tyrell, Ned gently inquired if there was any possibility of swaying the Tyrells to remain neutral or even throw their weight behind the crown independently of Casterly Rock. Renly, as cunning as he was charming, listened with a slight smile. "My good brother Loras might have more influence with his lord father and lord brother than I do," Renly said. "But is it wise, Lord Hand, to meddle in these alliances? I fear that if Tywin cements an alliance with the Tyrells, The crown will be bound even tighter to the West's gold, Ned replied. I'm asking that you help me ensure that the Tyrells do not become mere vassals of Lannister ambition. We need to keep a balance, or the realm suffers. Renly stroked the short beard he'd taken to wearing. You speak reason, Lord Stark, but the Tyrells value their feasts and their prosperity. They'll not casually defy House Lannister, not without assurances. What can the crown offer them? Ned paused. He had no vast reserves of gold. He could not match Tywin's coin, but perhaps there were other avenues. We can offer them positions of respect at court, a say in the management of the realm's finances going forward. The Tyrell name could garner more influence in King's Landing, and as you well know, alliances in the city can be as valuable as gold. If I speak to the king, I might secure new trade privileges for the Reach's harvest exports. Renly tilted his head. That might intrigue Mace Tyrell. The man loves the sound of his own heraldry, but he's not blind to the benefits of trade. And Loras, well, he might appreciate seeing his family's standing grow at court. If you can smooth that path, Lord Stark, I'll whisper in the right ears. Ned thanked him, though he was not entirely convinced Renly's meddling would suffice against Tywin's direct appeal to the Tyrells. Nevertheless, it was a start. He had to try. Every step he took felt like navigating a tightrope. If he pressed too hard, or if King Robert got wind of meddling he did not understand, Ned risked alienating the throne he was supposed to serve. But if he did nothing, Tywin's hold on the realm would become unassailable. Word reached Ned a week later that the Tyrells had not formally agreed to Tywin's proposal yet. Mace Tyrell had demanded certain additional benefits from the prospective alliance. Titles, territories, or trade concessions that Tywin was reluctant to grant. Tywin had many allies, but the Tyrells were not lesser bannermen. They commanded the wealth of Highgarden, second only to the Lannisters' own resources, and fed most of Westeros with their bountiful harvests. Negotiations were at a standstill. Ned took that as a chance to invite Mace Tyrell to King's Landing. He couched it as an invitation to a grand feast in honor of all the lords who had served valiantly in the last war. With Robert's half-hearted blessing, Ned arranged for a lavish banquet, financed not by Lannister gold, but by the coin that Peter Baelish scrounged from certain neglected royal assets. It was a precarious move, but Ned believed it was necessary. The day of the feast arrived, and the Red Keep bustled with activity. Servants rushed about with casks of fine arbor wine, enormous platters of roasted boar and venison, fresh fruit from the Reach, and spiced dishes favored in the south. Mace Tyrell arrived in grand fashion, accompanied by his sons and retinue. The crown spared no courtesy in greeting him, though Ned noted that King Robert's enthusiasm was mostly for the feasting rather than the politics. Cersei wore a gown of emerald silk that contrasted her golden hair, her expression watchful. Jaime Lannister stood at the back of the hall with the Kingsguard, seemingly indifferent but definitely noticing everything. Tywin himself did not appear. He was conveniently indisposed, sending polite regrets instead. That was a relief to Ned, who wanted to speak to Mace Tyrell without Tywin's overshadowing presence. During the feast, Ned sought a private moment with Lord Tyrell, who was busy devouring stuffed duck and bragging about the fertility of the Reach. They found a quieter alcove off the Great Hall, away from the throng of courtiers. Ned spoke earnestly, praising the Tyrells' tradition, and hinting that the king's hand desired a broader coalition for the good of the realm, rather than letting any single house dominate. Mace listened, puffing out his chest, dropping casual references to the glories of Highgarden. We Tyrells have always supported the throne, of course, Lord Stark. But times change, yes, times do. We must be sure House Tyrell receives its proper due in these uncertain days. Ned nodded gravely. I believe the realm thrives best when all houses share in its governance. King Robert, for all his strong qualities, is not always attentive. My hope is that by forging closer ties between Highgarden and the crown itself, we can address that oversight and ensure that the needs of the Reach remain top priority. Mace beamed at the praise. Indeed, indeed. It is said that gold flows from the west, but grain flows from the south. I do not think the Lannisters realize the importance of that. He leaned closer, dropping his voice. "Their proposition is interesting, of course, but my dear daughter Alice, for example, might gain more from a match that ties her directly to a seat of power, not one of Tywin's younger, unlinked kin." Ned saw his opening. He carefully refrained from offering anything too explicit. He could not dangle a royal marriage, for that was beyond his power. But perhaps an advantageous match with a Baratheon or a lesser Targaryen loyalist line that remained in King's Landing might appeal. "It is worth exploring, Lord Tyrell. If your house aligns itself firmly with the throne, I believe I can persuade King Robert to grant new privileges for your shipments of grain, or perhaps secure a more prestigious match in the capital." Mace's eyes gleamed. "Yes, well, let us speak further in the coming days. I have always said that House Tyrell and the Iron Throne should walk hand in hand." They parted, with Mace returning to the festivities in high spirits, and Ned experiencing a guarded optimism. This was the dance of politics, a skill Ned never wished to cultivate, but now found himself forced to master. By the next morning, rumors circulated that Lord Mace Tyrell was having second thoughts about a direct alliance with Tywin Lannister. This delighted Ned, though he knew Tywin would not be pleased. A confrontation was brewing, and Ned wanted to remain prepared. He redoubled the city's watch on Lannister movements. He soon learned, however, that Tywin had traveled from King's Landing to Harrenhal for a short gathering of lords from the Westerlands and the Riverlands. Many speculated the meeting concerned new trade routes or tax privileges. Ned believed it was something more, a strategic response to his own maneuverings with Mace Tyrell. When Tywin returned, something would change. Days turned to weeks, and King Robert, oblivious to the undercurrents, decided to host a tournament in honor of Lord Renly's birthday. The city swelled with lords, knights, and free riders seeking glory or coin. Ned disliked tournaments, too costly and too wasteful, but Robert was adamant, and the people of King's Landing were excited by the prospect. If nothing else, Ned reasoned, it provided a chance to see which lords were openly favoring House Lannister. The day of the Justs dawned bright and clear. Rows of tents and pavilions sprawled outside the city, each bearing sigils from across the 7 kingdoms. The crowd gathered in a grand array, cheering whenever a favored knight took the lists. Robert presided on a raised platform, goblet in hand, while Cersei sat beside him, wearing a faint smirk. Ned found a place among the highborn spectators, near Littlefinger and Lord Renly. He scanned the participants, noticing the Hound, Sandor Clegane, stoically preparing for his tilt. Ser Gregor Clegane, the Mountain, lurked near the far end, half in shadow. Ned felt a shiver of unease. Gregor was Tywin's man, a monstrous enforcer with no moral qualms about bloodshed. The presence of the Mountain served as a reminder of Lannister reach. Mace Tyrell and his sons stood out among the crowd, banners of the Golden Rose fluttering in the breeze. Loras Tyrell, the Knight of Flowers, cut a splendid figure as he prepared his snow-white stallion for the joust. Many cheered him as the paragon of young chivalry. Ned watched, curious to see if Mace would approach him. Instead, Mace's gaze swept the stands, clearly searching for signs of Lannister observers. There was tension in the air, a sense that any misstep might unleash a tidal wave of political consequences. As the jousting rounds proceeded, knights fell from their horses, crowds cheered or groaned, and money changed hands in the stands. Loras Tyrell won his first tilt gracefully, unseating a seasoned Stormlander knight. Jory Castle, one of Ned's own men, participated in the melee rather than the joust, showing skill if not flamboyance. Ned congratulated him afterwards with a brief word, proud of his retainer's performance. Near midday, as the sun climbed high and the crowd's thirst for spectacle grew, a herald announced the next round's participants. Loras Tyrell versus Ser Jaime Lannister. A hush fell momentarily. Jaime, the Kingslayer, wore gleaming gold armor that matched his hair, and he basked in the crowd's attention. Loras approached, paying his respects before mounting. Across the field, Jaime's expression was confident, a hint of scornful amusement on his lips. Ned noted that both men's families were deeply enmeshed in the realm's politics, so this tilt was more than a contest of skill. It was a symbolic clash. They charged. Loras angled his lance with precision. Jaime met him halfway, lance steady. The sound of splintering wood echoed. Loras rocked in his saddle but kept his seat. Jaime's lance shattered against Loras's shield. Their horses circled back. On the second pass, Loras aimed lower, catching Jaime near the hip, while Jaime's strike glanced off Loras's helmet. Jaime lost balance, nearly fell, but righted himself at the last moment. The crowd roared. On the third pass, both lowered their visors fully, spurred their horses, and thundered toward each other in a show of practiced grace. But just as they closed, Jaime's horse stumbled slightly on an uneven patch of ground. His lance veered, hitting Loras's shield at an awkward angle and snapping. Loras's lance struck true to Jaime's chestplate and knocked the Kingslayer from his saddle. Jaime crashed to the ground, the metal of his armor ringing across the field. An uproar ensued. Some cheered for the Knight of Flowers. Others watched Jaime's squires rush to help him. Jaime stood, face flushed with anger, but gave a stiff nod of acknowledgement to Loras. Loras offered a courteous bow in return. Ned caught the look of disgust on Cersei's face. The queen seemed displeased that her brother had been unhorsed by a Tyrell. Mace Tyrell, by contrast, was beaming like the sun, taking this victory as a sign of favor for House Tyrell. Then, from the crowd near the royal pavilion, there was a movement. Cersei rose, beckoning Loras Tyrell to approach. He did, dismounting gracefully, helmet in the crook of his arm. She praised him publicly, awarding him a wreath of golden roses, a symbolic gesture. Loras thanked her, kneeling briefly before King Robert, who grunted in approval. Ned observed it all with watchful eyes. Public praise from the queen to a Tyrell champion was not a small gesture. It could be read as an overture, or it could be seen as an attempt to placate a house that might be wavering in its alliances. As the tournament continued, Ned slipped away from the stands. He walked through the outskirts of the pavilion area, flanked by 2 Stark guards. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to happen. Around him, small folk drank, cheered, and gossiped. Merchants hawked roasted nuts, sweetmeats, and cheap ale. Ned's eyes roved across the scene, noticing the colors of various houses. He glimpsed men in the crimson of House Lannister, talking quietly among themselves. The sight of the Lannister lion only hardened his resolve. In that moment, Varys the Spider appeared by Ned's side, as if conjured from the shadows. "My Lord Hand," Varys said in his soft, insinuating voice. "What a splendid tournament, no? And how interesting the interactions between Tyrells and Lannisters. One might almost think there was a deeper conversation happening on these lists." Ned slowed his pace. "Varys," he acknowledged, "you always appear at opportune moments. What do you know?" Varys spread his hands. "I know that Lord Tywin has not returned from Harrenhal yet, but his messages have. Ser Jaime is displeased by his defeat, and the Queen sees it as an affront to her house's honor. Whispers say that Tywin is forging new agreements with certain lords in the Riverlands, terms that might strengthen his position should the Tyrells break from negotiations. Meanwhile, I hear a certain letter from Dorne arrived in the Red Keep, addressed to you." Ned's heart quickened. He had awaited Prince Doran's reply with anxious anticipation. "And what does it say?" Varys smiled lightly. "I have not opened it, my lord. I only hear that it is discreet and came by Raven rather than a public courier. You might want to read it at once." Ned nodded. "Thank you, Varys. You've lived up to your reputation again. But remember, the realm is bigger than one man's ambition." Varys placed a hand to his breast. "I serve the realm, Lord Stark. Always." Then, with a slight bow, he disappeared among the tents, leaving Ned to ponder the next move. He returned to the Red Keep that evening, after the tournament's final rounds concluded. Jory Castle, bruised but smiling, recounted the day's triumphs and humiliations as they walked together through the castle corridors. "Ser Barristan fought valiantly in the final melee," Jory said, "though Sandor Clegane bested him in the end. The Hound is fierce, my lord." Ned nodded absently, his mind already turning to the letter from Dorne. In the privacy of his solar, with Catelyn present, Ned opened the letter. The script was neat, formal. Lord Eddard Stark, I received your words with interest. Dorne has not forgotten the injustices inflicted upon us, but we also understand the need for peace in the realm. If the hand of the king truly seeks to balance powers so that no single house may dominate, Dorne may be inclined to assist. We will require assurances, as well as a gesture of goodwill from the crown. Too many times have our grievances been overlooked. We are patient, Lord Stark, but not without memory. Let us correspond further, and perhaps we shall find common ground to ensure the stability of Westeros. Doran of House Martell. Ned exhaled slowly. It was not an outright alliance, but it was a crack in the door. Dorne's support would be a potent deterrent against Tywin Lannister's attempts to control the realm's narrative. Catelyn, Ned said softly, this might be the best news we've had in weeks. If we can secure Dorne and keep the Tyrells from being locked to House Lannister, we might, just might, force Tywin to operate within proper channels. Catelyn laid a hand on his shoulder. And if Tywin refuses? He is not a man who bends easily. You've seen how he operates. He'll do whatever it takes to keep the advantage. Ned turned to her. I know, but perhaps that is where Robert must act. If Tywin resists or tries to circumvent the throne entirely, I will force Robert to confront him. Publicly, if need be. Robert is still the king. He can put a stop to Tywin's machinations if only he would care enough to do so. Catelyn's lips pressed together. We'll have to ensure that Robert does indeed care. In the days following, Ned dispatched a careful reply to Prince Doran, including references to potential redress for Dornish grievances, such as official recognition of certain borderline disputes, or the crown's support for Dorne's trade routes across the Red Mountains. He made no promises he could not keep, but offered a genuine willingness to help right old wrongs. In the meantime, Mace Tyrell lingered in King's Landing, enjoying the attention after his son's jousting victories. Ned invited him and several other lords to a smaller feast in the Tower of the Hand, more subdued but an opportunity to speak candidly. Over honeyed wine and spiced meats, Ned carefully steered the conversation toward the realm's future, emphasizing the need for unity, and how the Tyrells stood to gain from direct collaboration with the throne rather than tying themselves to Lannister fortunes. Mace seemed receptive, though he remained vague about any final decisions. Then, after a week of uneasy calm, Tywin Lannister returned to King's Landing. He arrived with a retinue of over 100 men, banners flying, armor gleaming. The city gates welcomed him like a conquering hero. Ned's watchers reported that Tywin looked well pleased with himself, and that he brought with him several smaller lords from the Riverlands, lords once sworn to House Tully, who apparently now looked more favorably upon Lannister offers of coin and mutual protection. This was a direct move against Ned's efforts to shore up Tully influence in the region. That evening, Ned received a summons to a private meeting with the king in the Royal Solar. He went at once, though he half suspected he knew the reason. Inside, he found Robert pacing, eyes blazing, with Cersei standing near the hearth, her posture stiff. On a table lay a sealed parchment bearing the royal sigil. Ned bowed. Your Grace, you sent for me? Robert whirled. Yes, I did. Tywin just came to me, complaining that my hand is trying to undermine Lannister alliances in the realm. He says you've been meddling with the Tyrells, and even with the Riverlands lords, to push House Lannister aside. Is that true? Ned's jaw clenched. Your Grace, I have been working for the good of the crown, not against any single house. If Tywin calls it meddling, it's only because he fears that his gold will no longer dictate the direction of the kingdom. The Tyrells, the Tullys, even Dorne, all have a place in ensuring balance. If one house grows too powerful, Robert slammed a fist on the table, rattling the goblets. Gods, Ned, we just had this conversation. I don't want your conspiracies. Tywin has bankrolled half my reign. I can't simply turn on him because you say he's too powerful. He's my father-in-law, for the gods' sake. Cersei's voice was cool, slicing into the heated air. What Lord Tywin is concerned about, Robert, is that the hand seems intent on isolating the West from its rightful influence. Father is not a usurper. He's the greatest ally the crown has. Ned met her gaze. Perhaps if the crown were not so deeply in debt to Casterly Rock, we would have more freedom. Are you denying that your father is shaping alliances for the sole purpose of cornering the realm's trade and political influence? Cersei arched a brow. I see no crime in forging alliances that strengthen the kingdom. Why shouldn't my father use his station and wealth to unify the realm? He served as hand for years before your time, Lord Stark. He knows how to run things. Ned could not hide his frustration. He served a mad king, and in the end, he turned on that king, sacked King's Landing, and secured your place here. Will you deny that as well? Robert snapped. Enough, both of you. The war's done. You said you wanted to keep the realm at peace, Ned. Well, forcing my father-in-law into a corner is not the way to do it. Robert sighed heavily, rubbing his brow. Gods, I hate all this. I just want peace. Ned tried to steady himself. I'm not forcing anyone, Robert. I'm giving the other houses a voice. It is your prerogative as king to choose how you handle Tywin's demands, but be warned. If you yield on every point, if you continue to let him finance everything without question, you will lose the respect of the realm. Better to stand firm on certain points, show that you are the king, and not a puppet of the West. Cersei's lips twitched in anger, but Robert seemed to consider Ned's words. Finally, the king nodded slowly. There might be something to that. His eyes flicked to his wife. Tywin's a proud man, but I can't let him think he owns the Iron Throne. Maybe I'll speak to him directly. See if we can't find some middle ground. Ned inclined his head. That is all I ask, Your Grace. Cersei's voice held a brittle edge. And what if my father refuses to be insulted? What if he demands the hand's removal? Will you let him go that far, Robert? The king bristled. I'll not be dictated to by Tywin, or by anyone. If Father Lannister wants Ned's head, he'll have to fight me for it. But I don't want this turning into a bloody feud. Do you understand? Ned bowed again. Of course, Your Grace. I serve at your pleasure. That night, Ned could not sleep. He walked the battlements of the Red Keep, feeling the warm breeze blowing in from Blackwater Bay. The city lig. HTS glimmered below, thousands of torches and lanterns in the darkness. He wondered how many of those tiny flames owed their bread and coin to Lannister gold, or how many put their hope in the Stark sense of justice. Perhaps neither. The people were simple folk, wanting only peace and prosperity. If the machinations of lords put them at risk again, it would be no less a tragedy than the one that had consumed the realm during the rebellion. In the days that followed, Robert did indeed speak with Tywin, though the details were not shared publicly. Rumors abounded. Some said Tywin had threatened to cut off all loans to the crown if Ned Stark was not reined in. Others whispered that Robert had roared back, reminding Tywin that the Lannisters were not kings. The truth likely lay somewhere in between. What mattered to Ned was that Tywin began making quiet overtures toward bridging a gap with the Tyrells rather than closing it, which suggested he was hedging his bets. Perhaps Tywin realized he could not afford to alienate the Reach entirely, not when the crown might pivot to them and Dorne for support. Yet as the tension rose, a series of alarming events struck the city. Mysterious attacks were reported on travelers along the Gold Road leading west, and the culprits wore no obvious sigils. Some said they were brigands, others that they were hired cutthroats aiming to sow chaos and blame it on the Lannisters or the crown. Ned suspected a third party might be at play, possibly Peter Baelish or others with a stake in seeing the realm destabilized. If chaos ensued, the city's power players could profit in the shadows. Ned found himself drowning in new complexities. He dispatched loyal guardsmen and, whenever possible, sought the help of the City Watch to keep the roads safer. But that only led to more tension between the Watchers loyal to the crown and those rumored to be paid off by the Lannisters. Everywhere he turned, there was a shadow of Tywin's gold, but no direct evidence to hold him accountable. One afternoon, just as Ned was about to attend a small council meeting, an urgent raven arrived from Riverrun. It bore the Tully seal and was penned by Ser Edmure Tully. In shaky script, Edmure explained that several landed knights in the Riverlands, those who had previously shown signs of leaning toward Lannister favor, had begun raising their levies, citing concerns about bandit incursions. Edmure feared it was a pretext for them to muster for House Lannister, potentially threatening the Tully seat if conflict arose. As Ned absorbed the news, a cold weight settled in his stomach. He had known Tywin was not a man to respond passively, but to stir up levies in the Riverlands so soon suggested an intent to apply pressure on House Tully. If a confrontation happened there, it would be a direct challenge to Ned's efforts to form a balanced coalition. Indeed, it could be the beginning of open hostilities. Without waiting for the small council, Ned sought out Robert in the training yard, where the king liked to take a few swings at straw dummies with his old warhammer. Robert was sweaty and red-faced when Ned approached, delivering the news. "He's mustering troops now?" Robert asked, panting. "Who is? Tywin or these little lords?" Ned shrugged, exasperated. The letter does not specify Tywin's direct involvement, only that these knights are using Lannister gold as leverage. They claim bandits threaten their borders, but Edmure suspects it is a cover to provoke House Tully or force them to accept Lannister dominance. "This is how it starts, Robert. A few musters here, a few bribes there, and suddenly we have a war on our hands." Robert spat, setting down his hammer. "I'll not have another war. 7 hells. I didn't endure the rebellion just to see the realm tear itself apart again." He waved for a towel, wiping sweat from his brow. "Tywin is many things, but is he truly foolish enough to risk open conflict with the crown?" Ned stared at him, frustration deepening. "He may believe he has enough influence to force your hand, Robert. If you don't stop him now, he might push until the Riverlands capitulate. After that, you'll see the Tyrells bend, then Dorne. One by one, the realm will yield to Lannister gold, making the Iron Throne a figurehead at best." Robert grunted, tossing the towel aside. "I'll call a halt to this nonsense. I'll send a royal missive forbidding the mustering of levies without explicit crown permission. That'll put a stop to it, or at least slow it down." His tone was resolute, but Ned wondered if words on parchment would suffice against Tywin's cunning. Still, it was better than nothing. Ned bowed. "Thank you, Your Grace. Let us hope this measure can avert escalation." That same evening, the small council convened in the presence of Tywin Lannister himself, who had been invited by the king. The council chambers were tense. Varys, Peter, Pycelle, and Renly took their seats around the table, while Robert sat at the head, flanked by Tywin on one side and Ned on the other. Cersei stood behind Robert's chair, her expression a mask of composure. The air crackled with anticipation. Robert opened the session by announcing the new royal decree. "It has come to the attention of the crown that certain knights in the Riverlands are mustering their levies without just cause. As king, I forbid any such musters unless explicitly sanctioned by the Iron Throne. Any lords or knights found in violation will be deemed in rebellion. That is the crown's will." He spoke in a loud, authoritative voice, though Ned could sense how forced it was. Tywin's face remained impassive, but his eyes flicked to Ned. Then he spoke, voice icy calm. "Your Grace, I support peace and stability in the realm. If certain knights in the Riverlands have grown alarmed by bandits or other threats, perhaps they merely seek to protect their people. I trust your decree will not punish loyal lords acting in good faith." Ned interjected. "Good faith does not involve taking Lannister gold to raise armies against one's liege lord, Lord Tywin. The Tullys rule the Riverlands by royal decree. If their bannermen have grievances, they must address them through proper channels." Tywin turned slowly to Ned. "Lord Stark, I have extended loans and offered assistance to various lords, but I have never once demanded they raise arms. If they do so, it is of their own accord." Cersei leaned forward, voice smooth. "Then there is no conflict. The king's decree stands, and I trust no loyal subject will resist it. Father, you do not object, do you?" Tywin tapped a finger on the table, considering. "Not at all, provided the crown remains impartial and does not single out House Lannister in its enforcement. If others muster troops, perhaps in the Vale or in Dorne, will they also face the king's wrath?" Robert's eyes flicked between them, irritation creeping in. "Any unlawful mustering is forbidden. That applies to the Vale, the Reach, Dorne, anywhere. Is that clear?" Tywin inclined his head. Perfectly clear, Your Grace. The meeting continued with mundane details, grain tallies, shipping routes, and the city's budget. But the real conversation had already taken place in that brief exchange. Tywin had signaled that if the crown dared to accuse the West of stirring trouble, he would point to everyone else as equally suspicious. It was a tactic to sow doubt and deflect blame. Ned remained on edge, but he appreciated Robert's attempt at decisiveness. When the meeting concluded, Tywin paused at the door, turning to Ned. "Lord Stark, might I speak with you briefly?" Ned looked to Robert, who shrugged, then nodded. "Very well," Ned said, and followed Tywin out into the corridor. The Lannister retinue lingered nearby, their crimson cloaks a slash of color in the torchlit hall, but Tywin waved them off, wanting privacy. They walked a short distance, stopping near a window that overlooked the city. Evening light cast long shadows across Tywin's face, making him appear almost hollow-cheeked, though no less formidable. "I have not come here to trade threats," Tywin began, his voice surprisingly calm. "You've made your concerns clear, and you've won the king's ear for the moment. But ask yourself, can you truly contend with the might of Casterly Rock if we are forced to become foes?" Ned faced him, the gentle breeze from the window catching strands of his dark hair. "I have no wish to be your foe, Lord Tywin. My only aim is to ensure that you do not rule the kingdom through gold and fear. The king should be the king, not your debtor or your puppet." Tywin's lips thinned. "The king is a fool drunk on memories of his glory days. Were it not for my gold, half the city would starve, and the other half would be choking on debt to the Iron Bank of Bravos. I keep this realm afloat, Lord Stark. You would be wise to remember that." Ned refused to break eye contact. "Perhaps you do, but at what cost? If you truly wish to avoid conflict, then prove it. Do not stir knights in the Riverlands with talk of bandits, or attempt to buy the loyalty of lords with your coin. Work within the framework of the crown, as you once did." Tywin gave a rare, humorless chuckle. "I served a mad king who disgraced me. I will not bow my head to another incompetent king. But I am not so blinded by my own pride that I wish to start another war. Wars are costly, after all. If you can restrain your zeal and remember that House Lannister is still the Queen's family, we might find a tolerable equilibrium." Ned inclined his head, acknowledging the opening. "I am prepared to keep the peace, so long as that peace doesn't become tyranny under a different name. The realm is bigger than any single house, even yours, Lord Tywin." Tywin gazed out the window at the sprawling city. "Then you must do your part to keep Robert from squandering the kingdom's resources on frivolities. You think I enjoy loaning the crown more and more gold each year, knowing it will never be repaid? If the North and the Riverlands and the other kingdoms step up to fill the gaps, perhaps the West need not carry all the burden." Despite himself, Ned found a sliver of truth in Tywin's words. Robert's negligence had certainly created the circumstances in which the Lannisters thrived. "I will do what I can, but the king's habits are not easily changed. If we can reduce the crown's dependence on Lannister gold, it might relieve the tension between us." Tywin's expression remained impassive, but his tone was a touch lighter. "A realm that depends less on the West is a realm in which Tywin Lannister has less leverage. Yet it might also be a realm that's more stable and stability is profitable. I'll consider that, but do not think I'll yield on matters of pride. I have not become who I am by gentleness. You stand in my way, Ned Stark. I will remove you. But if you make yourself an asset to the realm, I might find it in my interest to let you operate." Ned's mouth tightened. There it was, an admission that Tywin's personal interest superseded all else. "I stand for the realm, not for your profit. I'll not hinder you if you work for the realm's benefit. But if you move against it or bring war upon us, I will do my duty, no matter the cost." Tywin locked eyes with him, the tension palpable. Then he turned and strode away, his cloak swishing behind him like a dark tide. Ned exhaled a long breath, unsure whether the conversation was a small victory or a worrying sign of battles to come. Maybe both. In the weeks that followed, things remained precariously balanced. The knights in the Riverlands ceased open mustering, though rumors persisted of quiet drilling. Mace Tyrell delayed his final decision about an alliance with the Lannisters, entertained as he was by the new courtesies from the crown. Dorne's next letter expressed a guarded willingness to support the king's hand if certain matters continued to be addressed. And Robert, for his part, paid slightly more attention to the realm's accounts, though he still lived for the next hunt or the next feast. Ned pressed forward with further reforms, limiting the extravagance of court functions, redirecting coin to repair roads and city fortifications. This eased some of the discontent among lesser lords, who found traveling less hazardous. It also reduced the crown's reliance on Lannister loans, if only marginally. Tywin observed all this from a distance, no doubt calculating the broader implications. Then, as the year's final moon approached, King's Landing welcomed envoys from Bravos. These bankers came to discuss the crown's towering debt, and it was rumored they expected to see Tywin Lannister, who was known for financing large portions of the realm's obligations. Ned seized the opportunity. He arranged a meeting with the Bravosi envoys, making sure it was under the auspices of the Hand's authority. There, he negotiated new payment schedules that tapped into the North's resources of timber and the Vale's wealth in, or, should the Vale prove cooperative, thereby diversifying the crown's financial channels. Tywin was conspicuously absent from the negotiations, and the Bravosi seemed intrigued that the Hand was offering alternatives to Lannister credit. By the time Tywin received word of this arrangement, it was largely concluded. He had little choice but to accept the new conditions or else risk the realm defaulting entirely, which would harm everyone, including House Lannister. Ned was under no illusion that this was a complete solution, but it was another step toward reducing the stranglehold Tywin held over the crown's purse strings. And that was no small feat. Inevitably, Tywin summoned Ned to a final private audience before departing King's Landing to return to Casterly Rock. Ned arrived in the Lannister Manse, an opulent building within the city walls, replete with gold accents and crimson draperies. Guards escorted him through marble corridors until he stood in a lavish solar where Tywin awaited, seated at a desk, signing documents with a quill. Tywin did not rise. He looked up, pinning Ned with that cool, assessing gaze. "Lord Stark," he said, setting the quill aside, "I'll not waste your time with pleasantries. I am leaving the city." The Bravosi arrangement was interesting. Perhaps cunning would be the better word. Ned stood calmly, hands at his sides. "All done for the realm, my lord. I hope you understand." Tywin's jaw worked silently for a moment. Then he inclined his head. "I do. You have proven more resourceful than I anticipated. But know this, if the realm thrives, so do the Lannisters. I will not see my house pushed aside after generations of service and leadership. I will watch carefully from the rock." Ned met his gaze. "Watch as you will. I have no intention of pushing anyone aside who wishes to serve the realm fairly. But if you move to undermine the king again, to seize control or force us into further debt, I will oppose you." Tywin's thin lips curved in the faintest suggestion of a smile. "Oppose me all you wish, so long as you keep the king from squandering the West's gold. I may find your interference tolerable for now." He rose, stepping from behind the desk with measured poise. "I leave King's Landing in your capable hands, Lord Hand. May you continue to amuse me from afar." Ned merely nodded once. He departed with the sense of a contest neither truly won nor lost, but paused. At the threshold he turned, compelled to speak one last time. "Lord Tywin, for the sake of the realm, I hope we never become enemies on the battlefield." Tywin's eyes betrayed no emotion. "So do I, Lord Stark. War is bad for business." And thus Ned left, the corridors echoing under his boots, aware that he had initiated a challenge to Tywin Lannister's grip on the kingdom months earlier. The immediate battle might be over, but the greater war of influence still raged in the shadows. He had forced Tywin to contend with a more balanced approach to power. Whether that fragile balance would last depended on many factors: Robert's will, the readiness of other houses to stand firm, and Tywin's capacity for patience. Winterfell beckoned in his dreams, a peaceful place far from the intrigues of the South. But Ned knew that as long as he served his hand, there was no return to that simple life. Not while the Lion of the West prowled, waiting for the moment to strike again. And so he continued his silent vigil over the realm, determined to uphold honor, determined to ensure that no man's ambition, be he king or lord, could strangle the Seven Kingdoms as it had once been strangled by a mad king's tyranny. This was Ned Stark's promise to himself and to the realm, that even if he stood alone, he would stand to the last, guarding against the slow creep of gold and greed that threatened to darken the realm more surely than any winter storm. In the Red Keep, he resumed his duties, day in and day out. The crown's finances improved slightly under his guidance, and the small council found fewer reasons to rely on Tywin. Mace Tyrell remained in a holding pattern, though Ned suspected he would eventually strike a deal, be it with Tywin or with the crown more directly. Dorne's couriers continued to appear discreetly, forging a slow but steady rapport with the Hand. The Riverlands settled into an uneasy calm, with Edmure Tully carefully watching those knights who had once turned to Tywin for coin. Robert, for his part, wavered between gratitude to Ned for handling matters he had no patience for, and resentment that he was no longer the warrior king of old. The memory of his rebellion glories haunted him, leaving him moody and prone to outbursts. But as time passed, even Robert could not deny that Ned's approach was keeping the realm afloat without excessive new debts to the west. Perhaps, in his own way, Robert was pleased to see that the Stark sense of duty was paying dividends. Months later, Ned would recall the day of his first confrontation with Tywin, in the Tower of the Hand, and realize how pivotal that early challenge had been. By forcing Tywin out of the shadows, by daring to speak openly of the threats posed by a single house's dominion, Ned had set the tone for his tenure as Hand. He would not be a puppet nor a bystander. He had taken the risk of Tywin's anger and survived it. Though the future remained uncertain, that single act of defiance had opened pathways to alliances and strategies that provided a counterweight to the Lannister gold. For now, the storm of open war had been held at bay. Yet Ned Stark, ever vigilant, understood that peace in the Seven Kingdoms was like the calm of a glassy lake. One stone thrown could ripple across the surface and disrupt everything. Tywin Lannister was no small stone. He was a mountain of granite, waiting to be cast. And so the final question would always remain, lingering in Ned's mind. How long would the uneasy equilibrium last before another confrontation proved unavoidable? As he looked upon the royal court, the far-flung alliances, and the precarious holds upon power, he realized that for the realm's sake, he must be ready. Honor and duty demanded nothing less. If Tywin Lannister rose again to challenge the rightful order of the Seven Kingdoms, Ned Stark would answer that challenge, come what may. His footsteps echoed along the marble floors of the Red Keep as he left the Great Hall one evening, passing the dragon skulls that lined the lower vaults, relics of an older age where dragons had enforced the Targaryen will. Perhaps in this new age, the battles would not be fought with fire and blood, but with gold and alliances. Yet in some ways it was no less dangerous. He prayed to the old gods that wisdom would prevail, that men would not rush headlong into destruction for the sake of vanity. But if the old gods had taught him anything, it was that men's natures rarely changed. Pride, ambition, fear, these forces guided them as much as honor or duty. At times, Ned felt certain that the realm was teetering on the edge of a knife, and only the steadfastness of a few kept it from toppling into chaos. He recalled the hush that had fallen during his confrontation with Tywin in the Tower of the Hand, the sense that they stood at the precipice of a larger conflict. They had stepped back, for now, but the precipice remained. Perhaps it always would. Still, Ned found a measure of comfort in small victories. A new harbor regulation passed without Lannister interference, the Riverlands shipping grain unencumbered, the Vale quietly reinforcing roads that brought trade into the capital without needing Lannister caravans. Bit by bit, the realm found ways to balance the West's might. Bit by bit, Tywin was forced to accommodate rather than dictate. He also took comfort in his family. Despite the disquiet in King's Landing, he managed to spend time with Sansa and Arya, guiding them in their lessons. He promised them that one day they would return to Winterfell, that the North still awaited them with open arms. In those moments, he felt the weight of responsibility settle on him like a cloak of ice. If he failed in King's Landing, his daughters, his house, the entire realm could suffer. But if he succeeded, perhaps a future of relative peace would exist for his children to inherit. On a cool morning, he practiced swordplay in the courtyard, the sun just cresting the walls. He wielded ice carefully, mindful of its imposing weight. Each swing was a reminder of his vows, of the burden of justice. Guards passed by, saluting him. Septa Mordane led Arya and Sansa through the yard, pointing out the daisies growing in the cracks of the stone. Arya complained about needlework, while Sansa eyed her father with a mixture of pride and curiosity. Ned paused, lowering the greatsword, and gave them a small smile. He felt the tension in his shoulders from weeks of political wrangling, from months of standing against Tywin's quiet manipulations. Yet in that moment, with the dawn light and his children's chatter, he felt renewed. He remembered why he had confronted Tywin in the first place, not out of pride or ambition, but to preserve a realm worth living in, worth leaving behind for the next generation. So the days continued, each one a new challenge, each sunrise a chance to hold fast to honor in a place where that virtue was scarce. Ned Stark, the Hand of the King, had shown Tywin Lannister, among others, that not all men bowed to gold. Some bowed only to what was right. And though the future was unwritten, for the time being, the Northmen's quiet defiance burned like a beacon in the political gloom of King's Landing. For better or worse, Ned's early confrontation with Tywin had set a precedent. No matter how formidable House Lannister might be, there would always be those who rose against unchecked power, who demanded accountability and strove to protect the fragile tapestry that bound the Seven Kingdoms together. In doing so, Ned reminded them all that sometimes duty and honor could stand firm against even the greatest lion's roar. And in that stand, there was a flicker of hope for a realm always teetering on the edge of ruin, longing for the faint promise of peace.